I'm even tempted to shave the beard off.
What, completely?
Mm-hmm.
How long has it been since you were clean shaven?
A year.
Oh, okay, that's not too bad. I'm coming up for 14 years.
Wow.
Hi, I'm Jock.
Hey, I'm Ray.
You're listening to The Pig Wrestlers, a podcast where Ray and I are reviewing this book, Never Wrestle With A Pig by Mark McCormack.
So we made a lot of progress on the product side of the Skyscanner for mortgages to the level where other data suppliers are now like, please use our data instead.
Hooray! That's it.
And so I'm hoping within the next 3 months, we've got almost all the functionality we need. So everything except for the open banking.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe even the open banking that gets the bank statements in. So we have to ask people to scan in the bank statements. But that could be you landing on the website and literally 15 minutes later having a mortgage application submitted.
Nice.
And that is unheard of, not possible today. Like, it's a minimum of weeks for that to happen.
Who's your friend that did that thing where they apply for every single online bank account?
Peter Ramsey, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, built for Mars.
Yeah, get him on the case. He'll knock up the open banking for you.
Yeah, like the problem with open banking is that all the providers that have raised like ludicrous amounts of money, all they do is hand you an API so that you can go banking in. You've actually got to do all the work with the transaction data.
Yep.
So that's the problem in the industry. And so we are going to be using Credit Kudos because they're using open banking to set up a new credit reference agency to compete with Experian and Equifax. They've actually done a really good job with the categorization of the transactions. Now, obviously, they're more expensive, but you're getting the ability to not have to have a dev team do all that work. And it's a learning exercise, right? You've got to look at all these bank statements and pick up all these transactions and be able to figure out, what's income and what's essential expenditure and what's other expenditure. And like, oh, is that income or is that just, somebody sending money into the accounts? Like,
So Free Agent, Ember, I think probably the Challenger Bank, business banks are all doing transaction categorization now. And
are they?
Yeah. So even Tide that I use is trying to do automated categorization. Because I think basically the way it goes is that once they get all of their customers retraining their algorithm for categorization, guess what? They got a really good algorithm now.
Because I use a lot of these, and like categorization is unusable.
It's variable, so it depends on what you fed it. With the Free Agent one I use, it's right most of the time, but then again, I don't have that much variability in the stuff. But that works for me. That's fine. Tide's one is, you can tell it's learning. It's better than it was, but it's by no means perfect yet.
This is what I find really annoying with like companies that are sort of post Series A, is you've got all this cash. Like, why are product teams in the UK just not very good?
So it depends, right? So I saw quite a big difference. I mean, I've worked in London and Cambridge mainly, and I saw quite a big difference in kind of the culture of startups in Cambridge versus those in London. The ones in London, kind of Silicon Roundabout, Old Street area, that kind of thing. Very much looking to Silicon Valley for inspiration and kind of that side of things. So very much US facing. Whereas with Cambridge, and again, I don't want to generalize too much, but because quite a lot of the startups were formed around essentially academic research that they were trying to commercialize, it was a very different sort of way of thinking about it. And it was kind of like they'd solved a problem and they knew it was a tricky problem, because they'd spent like however many years on a doctorate doing it kind of thing. But at the same time, it's then say, well, where can we find somewhere to apply this? But like some of these startups recently, so Feature Space, I think, is a good one that does machine learning based fraud detection and that kind of thing. And that came out of essentially academic research from University of Cambridge. They're doing quite well. You know, they were, I think, working with Betfair, I think last time I saw what they were doing. And, you know, they've got quite an interesting one where they're looking at, in effect, aberrant behavior. So in other words, behavior that doesn't look like it used to, and say, well, what's going on there? And flagging, if it's enough different, then they'll flag it. But it could also be, they also can track emergent behavior. So what was like a one cluster of activity and behavior will subdivide as they see that actually there's distinct behaviors within there. So it kind of can distinguish between evolution, if you like, and deviation from what is acceptable or normal behavior.
Where was it? I think I probably read it, something you posted. Analyzing someone's gait is more of an indicator of whether it's them or not than like retinas and fingerprints.
I'd love that to have been me, but sadly it wasn't. That sounds great. Well, no, somebody's walking a little bit suspiciously.
Yeah, totally.
That's great.
I had to dig it out. But that was like a really fascinating article. It's like, yeah, like they do it completely unconsciously, right? And I'm sure everybody's gait is ever so slightly different.
That's really funny.
So we got Emerson on the show, and you know, he's got a lot to say about the way startups do their dev work, because he's come from an environment like working on like 15 gig source files and like needing to do continuous deployment and like having a sense of trust with your dev team. And you know, I've experienced this firsthand. I'm sure you've seen it. It's like that's still in startup land, like a question of like how you're supposed to be deploying. Like there's not a, you know, template you take off the shelf. Like this is what we're going to set up. This is how we're going to be deploying. This is the process. This is how we do code reviews.
That said, I think, okay, so code reviews aside, because that's kind of an area where I know that they're important, but I have no kind of context for what makes a good code review versus bad code review practice and so on. But the continuous deployment thing, what kind of gets me a little bit is that I guess on the one hand, it's good that the process is being tailored to each organization. The bad thing is that every organization seems to be reinventing the wheel. And even if you're using the big building blocks, containerization and all the orchestration stuff that goes around it, you're still starting with too many building blocks. It seems like a lot of effort being invested in getting the pipeline sorted out. Now, that said, I think getting a simple pipeline going is actually pretty straightforward. But I think it's when the complexity adds on. And particularly, I think if you're trying to retrofit kind of a continuous deployment pipeline onto something that wasn't there before, then that can be quite fraught.
But it shouldn't. You're likely going to be coding in some form of Python, Ruby, Rails, Node, or maybe your Clojure shop, right? There's got to be like here's everything you need out of the box, but it doesn't seem like there is. Like I love things like AWS's Elastic Beanstalk. You don't need to load balance ever again. Turns out you do need to. Like there's a whole bunch of things you need to set. Like why did it come with settings?
Yes, the infinite customizability.
Right. Like and you know, people have derided the iPhone for like, oh, you can't customize it. Like, yeah, that's why it's so good. Like I bought this a few months ago. I was really keen to start with a clean slate, like get rid of all the clutter. You know, it was so easy just to hold the other phone close to it and it's transfer the data from one to the other. They're like, oh, yeah, maybe I don't want to waste days of my time customizing this thing to the way I want it, because what I really want to do is make phone calls and send messages. You just want to deploy something to a freaking server and have it work.
Yeah, there's a lot in that. There's a lot in between those two endpoints.
We started this business. Like, the person that we hired was like, wanting to spend like 2 weeks just setting everything up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, no, I'm not going through this again. Like, no, not happening. And I get why he wanted to do it, but not here. Like, that's big organization stuff. Like, not in a startup. That's 2 weeks. We'll be learning something those 2 weeks. We speak to customers.
What's the alternative then?
So we start with Heroku, right? Start out of the box, press a button, it's done. Yeah, that works.
I think the devil comes in the detail. When you start needing to do something that deviates from the template, then that's where the complexity starts to creep in.
Maybe people need to relook at the requirements and go, like, we don't need to deviate from the template. Eric Ries, he preaches about, you don't need to be doing all these things that everybody else has already done. Like, focus on the things that are actually going to get you to product market fit.
Yeah.
And so as a complete tangent from there, his long-term stock exchange, his big project, has finally got like 2 major wins in that, Asana and Twilio. So I immediately emailed back. They're like, how do I now buy Asana and Twilio stock on the long-term stock exchange? Obviously, I'm still waiting for an answer.
So explain what the long-term stock exchange is, because I vaguely remember Eric Ries talking about it, but I have to admit I've forgotten the particular concept and how it works.
So the idea was that the quarterly cadence of public companies in the US is distorting their priorities to be short-termist. Oh, we got to make the next quarter revenue. We've got to make the next quarter revenue. Otherwise, we're going to get mullered by the stock market. And he's saying that that's just not clever. And so the vision behind the long-term stock exchange is to reward companies that subscribe to a bunch of principles that are a bit more long-term. And so that way, the people that invest through the long-term stock exchange and the people that list on the long-term stock exchange and operate those businesses have a long-term alignment rather than the short-term madness that happens in the public stock markets that currently exist. And I think, like, if you invest, you're locked in. You can't just be trading all the time, which, by the way, is the smarter way to invest for like 99.999% of us. Like, we're not traders largely, when most of us are not financially sophisticated. And so we shouldn't be trading. We should be making investment decisions for the long term.
Yeah.
And arguably the world's greatest investor, Warren Buffett, that's how he invests. Does lots and lots of research, reads loads and loads, and then when he commits and has conviction, he makes a long-term investment.
I was listening to a podcast that inevitably was talking about Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and I can't remember who the quote was from, but saying that essentially, if you're trading, you failed. Yeah, right. Trading is a sign that you made the wrong choice, that you should have stuck with it. And it probably was Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, simply because of the long-term view they have. But I can't remember who actually said it.
Like, if you read his annual letters, you can see the public stocks that they bought and like how long they've owned these stocks, and like, actually let me pick it out because it's really fascinating.
And there was a big thing with Chamath, so-called the Prince of SPACs, because somebody was not doing a hatchet job on him, but was kind of saying, a lot of his investments are, yes, down, like Virgin Galactic and this, that, the other, but also sort of grudgingly conceding that they're all basically up above their original trading price, their IPO. So it's like, this is a non-article. But Chamath was saying that he doesn't expect to sell any of his holdings in any of these companies because he believes in them. And if he believes in them, he shouldn't be selling.
But they're all like 20-year bets. Like Virgin Galactic, when it gets to doing multiple flights a week of people going up to suborbital space for, £250,000 a ticket, $250,000 a ticket, that's going to be an effing good business. right? And like Richard Branson going up this last week, showing how easy it was that somebody of an advanced age could do that and, be fine enough on the ground afterwards to be getting interviews. That's real. That doesn't need astronaut training. Like, you can go up there and look down at the Earth. Like, people pay for experiences all day long, right? Look how much Disneyland rakes in.
Did you see the story about a multimillionaire who's put down, I can't remember how many millions of dollars on Jeff Bezos' Blue Orbit flight and can't go because he's a bit busy?
No. The guy who paid like $18 million for like to go up with Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, he said it can't go, too busy.
No. That's a joke, right? Really?
See, I'd love it if it's a joke, but also I'd love it if it's like the world's weakest excuse for saying that you don't want to go because you're a bit worried about it.
Winner of $28 million Blue Origin ticket, replaced by 18-year-old gap year student. Blue Origin confirmed to Forbes that Damon was a participant in the June auction and secured a seat on Blue Origin's second flight. Scheduling conflicts. Instead, taking his place on board Blue Origin's new Shepard mission from West Texas on July 20th will be one Oliver Damon, a gap year student who graduated from high school last year and will start to earn his degree in physics and innovation management.
Isn't that mind-blowing? What's so important that you have to postpone going to space?
So I think this is the son of the person who bought the ticket.
Really? Okay. Well, that makes a bit more sense.
Wow. Yeah, but like, if you look at Chamath's SPACs, right? Open Door, by far and away, is like the future of buying and selling homes in the US. Virgin Galactic, like getting people up there on a commercially viable basis.
So, particularly with Virgin Galactic, if they can turn it from being just a novelty sort of fairground ride, albeit an expensive one, into something that actually delivers something a bit more. So they must have been thinking, get up to suborbital levels and then you can get from London to New York far more quickly than trying to cut it through the atmosphere.
Maybe. But like, what's wrong with just, a leisure activity?
Well, it's like anything else. At the beginning, yeah, fine. It's going to be magical and it's going to be super expensive and only the very rich will be able to do it. But in time, it will, like anything else, it will become more commoditized. It will become run-of-the-mill. The prices will come down.
I don't know, man. Have you seen the prices for Disneyland?
But they are finding ways to increase their value periodically. But yeah, there's just that thing where it's going to not become mundane, but it's going to become a lot cheaper. It's like Concorde was magical. Well, it's still pretty awesome.
I get that it doesn't fly anymore, but even today, like it's incredible.
It was very difficult for it to make any money.
Doesn't matter. It was incredible. It was something you talked about, right? You held in high esteem. One day I'd love to go on Concorde. It was on everybody's bucket list.
Yeah, and it's still an astonishing achievement, particularly in like the 60s when they originally built it.
And this is why I complain, like, what happened since the 60s? Like, why did it take so long for someone to do what SpaceX has done and like dramatically by orders of magnitude reduce the cost of going up there?
Well, particularly with space travel, there's a whole bunch of problems, not least the fact that the thing you're riding on is basically a semi-controlled bomb.
Right.
And just the politics, because you had things whenever basically something goes wrong,
right?
It's very difficult to suddenly, to turn that around. And in the case of when NASA was really the only player on the US side of things, say, can you give us some more taxpayers' money to fund potentially blowing up people in a very visual and public way?
Perfect.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a hard one, and that's fair enough. But also there's another aspect which is okay, fine. Right? They've been to the moon several times. They've been up to the International Space Station. Yada yada yada. Okay, they are doing experiments and so on. But what are they? What do they have to show for it? I mean, other than the fact of just making it more regular and making it more run of the mill and more mundane, which is basically what SpaceX is doing. Yeah. They're making it. They're taking the magic away from it.
No, I don't buy that. They've made it more magical. They're making it believable that you and I could go up there.
They've basically turned it into a vertical shipping company.
Right. Isn't it magical that, Sophie can message me yesterday morning. I can jump onto Amazon and get some flashcards of like phonics and ABCs and numbers like sent by 10 p.m. that same day.
Yes and no. I don't know. It's too commonplace now. And the thing is, when you've got something that was magical, like space travel, essentially being categorized by cost per 100 kilos of freight, in effect, that you're sticking into the sky, it kind of takes it a little bit away from it. When aircraft, when jet airplanes came out, the jet age of the 50s and the 60s, it was magical. It was the elite, the glitterati, it was film stars and musicians that were doing all the flying, and then it became run the mill, and then, here we are now, we've got EasyJet and Ryanair and...
What a dampener.
I know, but that's what's happening with space travel.
Is it not incredible to still, jump on something like a A380 and, feel it shuddering when this massive hulk is trying to go airborne? It's incredible. What a feat of engineering.
I'm kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit because I was in Duxford with my boy yesterday. So we were stood in the Concorde test rig, the test jet. And the other one, which always blows my mind in the US bit of the museum, US Air Force bit of the museum, is they've got the SR-71 Blackbird.
That was I had top trumps for all these planes.
Yeah.
That was always the one I wanted.
Yeah, the Blackbird always kind of kicked everything's ass. And there's so many engineering reasons why that thing was insane. So, for example...
Like McLaren F1 of the sky.
It wasn't even that. McLaren F1 was positively reliable in comparison. This thing, right, they had to take off, right, with minimal fuel because it had to get up to a certain speed so that the frame around the fuel tanks would expand with the friction of the heat sufficiently to seal up the gaps in the fuel tank to allow it to be fueled. So it had to get off the ground, get up to speed, get hot, expand, and then they could fuel it up in midair. Just mental. And it's an astonishing thing. It still looks intimidating. It's huge. It's black. It's matte. It looks like it's an alien spaceship, and it's just this black looming thing in the corner. But yeah, it's crazy. And that's, again, 50s. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think all flying is fantastic and magical still, and absolutely. I'm just kind of trying to be a bit of a curmudgeon about it. But I think they're doing the same thing with space travel, which is it's going to become commoditized.
I want more of it. I want more of it everywhere. Like being on the ground is overrated. Give us more flying, more space, lots of it. Where's my jetpack?
You've seen the jetpacks they've got now.
They're still a bit you need to be a trained pilot to operate it type thing.
Yeah, but again, we come back to the things trying to kill you. You're listening to the Pig Wrestlers podcast. We're meant to be reviewing the book Never Wrestle With A Pig by Mark McCormack, but we don't always get around to it.